Well, welcome everybody. Excited to have you out here for this unique session that we're doing outside of our standard weekly Wednesday webinar series. Real quick, if you're having any sound quality issues, can't hear me, can't see me, head up to that audio tab, click on the sound check button, and that should resolve most of your issues. If that doesn't work, try switching between phone or computer. And finally, if that doesn't work, log out of go to and log back in anytime during the session if you lose sound. Try those strategies and it should be able to resolve your problem. If you want, for those of you who are joining us here to get continuing education units for your professional CEUs, watch this entire session and then take the survey that pops up at the end. The same survey will be emailed to you an hour later too, so one way or another, please just take that and then we can get your information. And before we get started, for those of you who don't know us, we do weekly Wednesday webinar series, so we do have several coming up, but we're also going to be starting our virtual live home tour series. So very excited to be doing the low carbon design with budget in mind virtual home tour with our member Nathan Kipnis and Scott Sanders of Brightleaf out of Chicago on the 16th, two Saturdays from today. So I hope you can join us with that and other sessions we're doing. And then while I have your attention, a quick plug to you who live and work in DTE Energy's all electric or dual fuel territory. They have a survey going around, and if you sign up for it, this puts you in the front line to access up to $5,000 to $9,000 worth of rebates to take your home, your new home, all electric. So if you're a builder, fill it out. If you're an architect, fill it out. If you're a homeowner who's going to be building, send this to your builder, get them to fill it out. Very exciting stuff here, and they opened that back up to complete it. And then also, I hope you want to stick around for another session tonight with our friends at the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. They're doing My Solar Stories every Thursday night at 7. There's the link there for one of the stories that are going to be happening tonight. It's a free Zoom meeting, a 20-minute presentation followed by a 20-minute Q&A. So check that out immediately following this session if you want to join them. Support our mission to empower people to make the places we live healthier and more sustainable. Keep these sessions going and free. Among many other benefits, check us out and become a member today. All right, well, I want to welcome everyone to Virtual Citizen Participation Meeting, the world's first living, building, and passive house multifamily joint certification project. This course is approved for 1 hour in continuing education units, GBCI, AIBD, BPI, NonWholeHouse, as well as AIA, Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. I am Brett Little. I am the executive director at the nonprofit, the Green Home Institute. We're headquartered right out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we're very excited to have you out here today. This session is going to be talking about, in general, the basics of passive house and living building challenge within rentals. And then, of course, a huge focus on ensuring those of you in the area in Ann Arbor have a chance to weigh in and add your comments to this development. So we want to hear mostly from you. So we're going to be taking questions as we go. You can put them in the chat box. We might try to answer them there, but we'll get to the formal Q&A at the end. If you want to unmute yourself and talk, raise your hand at the end, and we'll try to get you on to talk if it works out from your audio. Otherwise, we'll be answering those questions verbally during the Q&A session. And again, right before we start, a huge thanks to our sponsors, especially our top tier ones, Mitsubishi Electric to help take your project to net zero, all electric, Rheem for heat pump water heaters, Ava Windows water furnace, Build Equinox for smart home ventilation, and Niagara Conservation. Thanks to them and all of you. Today's speaker is going to be Doug Selby, longtime GHI member, a building science expert, and co-founder of Meadowlark Builders. Doug attended Michigan State University and graduated with his bachelor's in chemistry. After working as a pharmaceutical chemist and cancer research for 7 years, Doug left the profession in 1998 to become a carpenter, learning all the trades while remodeling rental houses. During the early and mid-90s, Kirk, Brandon, and Doug also founded and ran a woodworking company in Ann Arbor where they honed their appreciation for fine craftsmanship. Doug and Kurt co-founded Meadowlark in 2004 on their previous experience in both businesses and trades. Doug spent several years studying primitive living skills and enjoys cooking, growing food, and trying to keep up with his kids. So with that, Doug, I am going to pass it off to you, and please take it away.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate that. And thanks, everybody, for attending. I am having a little bit of trouble here, but I am going to put that over here. So I just want to thank everybody for attending, like I said, and I also want to thank Stephen Postma and Brett Lennart from the City of Ann Arbor, who worked hard to make this video conference format possible during this COVID crisis. So if you're watching, thanks, guys. We appreciate it. And I guess I'd like to start by showing you an image that I'm sure that you're all sick to death of at this point. And let me see if I can bring that up. So you guessed it, it's the coronavirus. Am I showing that? No, there it is, okay. So I think a lot of us didn't probably realize the impact this would have in our lives when we first started hearing about it. And I know I didn't. A lot of epidemiologists did though, and they were yelling at the top of their lungs, but our media and our politicians didn't listen to their advice. You know, and because our political discourse in this country is fairly broken and often pretty fact-free and centered on opinions and both siderism, I think that the American population didn't have the ability to do something when it mattered either, and we remained sort of uninformed about it. So, you know, why am I talking about the coronavirus? Well, there's a lot of lessons here for all of us, and not the least of which is we should be listening to the scientists. Those countries who have done well and are safely opening back up base their reactions on facts and proven scientific processes, not a political calculation. Another lesson is that the early action is worth 1,000 times late action. Just 2 to 3 weeks earlier with a strong coordinated response in this case, and we would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in economic damage probably by the time all is said and done. So yet another lesson is that something that starts out as a minor inconvenience can easily snowball into a life-changing event for all of us when leaders downplay or ignore warnings at a critical juncture. So I'd like to have you think about all that as we consider this date, 2030. This is the date by which the world needs to stop burning fossil fuels. It's 10 years from now. You know, 10 years ago, my daughter was in preschool and now she's driving. So it's just a blink of an eye. And if we don't reach this target, we will sail past the tipping point of catastrophic climate change. Global temperatures will be a runaway train, and they'll be rising at least 4 degrees Celsius above the normal range that we've had for millions of years before we started burning fossil fuels en masse. This will begin the process of transforming our world into something that none of us can imagine. So at 4 degrees Celsius, what we're talking about is an area the size of California that would burn in North America every single year. There'd be catastrophic droughts and heat waves combined with pretty epic flooding in America's breadbasket. Would make farming less and less possible in those areas as they slowly turn into desert. Category 5 and as yet unseen Category 6 hurricanes slamming into our coastline year after year, one after the other, driven by rising ocean temperatures. And you know, by the way, climate change and the devastation of our natural habitat is responsible for the emergence of deadly viruses. SARS, Ebola, MERS, HIV, now coronavirus. This is not a coincidence. This is a message from Mother Nature. The coronavirus is just a warm-up act for the deadly pandemics we'll see if we continue on this path. Our world and national leaders know this, every single one of them. And that's why they got together to make the Paris Climate Agreement. So right now we're at 1.1 degrees temperature rise globally. That's 411 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now these numbers are very strongly correlated. More carbon dioxide, higher global temperatures. They move in lockstep. The science is settled on this, and it has been for decades. There's simply no debate in good faith about how more carbon in the atmosphere equals higher global temperatures. 1.5 degrees Celsius is what the Paris Climate Agreement settled on as the highest number we could accept without some really ugly things starting to happen. And I want to be clear here, there's still a lot of bad effects at 1.5 degrees Celsius, even worse than we're seeing now, but it's a world that we can live in that won't be too dissimilar from where we live now. At 2 degrees Celsius, we reach the tipping point into what the climate scientists call catastrophic climate change. And this is because feedback loops start to really ramp up, and we lose the ability to control those effects. Things get really dangerous if we go too much past 2 degrees Celsius. At 4 degrees, climate change is a runaway train, and we're looking at societal breakdown around the world. At 4 degrees Celsius, Greenland will be the place to be. And will we survive as a species? I think probably we will, but we may take down 80 or 90% of the other species, or they may be on their way out. So I can assure you that if we survive, we won't be living our best life. It's likely that we'll be hunting and gathering again, but without the vast ecological wealth that our planet has offered our species throughout the history of our species. So lest you think this is hyperbole, this is the double cover of National Geographic last month. And this publication has been devoted to scientific discovery for 132 years. The facts are really not debatable. We've run out of time to wave this away or to pretend that it's somebody else's problem. It's our problem now, and we have to solve it, or we are literally leaving our future generations hell on earth. I've always loved all of Tolkien's books. They're full of momentous events and intricate curiosities. The Lord of the Rings has to be one of the great stories of all time. There's mythology and epic battles against great odds. It's a classic clash of good against evil. Plus there's like orcs and trolls and wizards and stuff, and who doesn't love a story with that? So, but I really love the scene in the movie, and it's where Frodo first realizes the full weight of what he must do. He has to go to the very heart of hell and deliver this ring. Otherwise, all that is good in the world will be lost. And he says to Gandalf, I wish this need not have happened in my time. And Gandalf, who's masterfully played by Ian McKellen, looks at him with all the empathy and compassion in the world and says, so do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. What we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. So it's a great story, and it's also easy to think that it's just a fantasy, but actually the stakes are just as high in our story. The difference is that in our story, the line between good and evil is so much less clear. It's also hard to raise a volunteer army when there's no visible enemy storming the gates. But in my opinion, we have orcs and trolls in our story too. They just happen to wear nice clothes and appear on cable TV news. They tell us this is a hoax, or that the climate has always changed, so no big deal, or that it's too expensive to do anything and we'll destroy the economy if we try. Or they might say that there's some miracle technology right around the corner that's going to save us all. Or the latest one I've been hearing that I just literally just kills me is that there's no way to stop this. It's inevitable, so we might as well just give up trying. So we can't listen to them anymore. There are two paths in front of us, and they couldn't be more clear. One path destroys our grandchildren's futures, and the other would create millions of good jobs, transforming our nation to a green economy and becoming a world leader again. So we have a choice. We can go down without a fight, or we can create the greatest economy the world has ever known. And we can save our grandchildren's future in the process. So I know what you're thinking. What does this have to do with the project at 530 North Division? Well, a lot actually. Buildings are the #1 contributor to greenhouse gases, and among residential buildings, American homes are by far the world's largest energy hogs. Now, I'm just a home builder, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do know that I have a part to play, as does every single one of us in our own areas. So that's what this is about, is how do we get there in a practical sense in our building environment. So I want to give you a bit of background on the history of shelters, and then I want to talk about the path to net zero energy. It's not easy, but it is possible. Energy consumption is not really the only thing that matters, though. There are nearly 8 billion of us on the planet, and at some point we have to realize we're not the only life that matters. I want to talk about building an energy policy, because policy drives results. And last, I want to give you some real life examples, including 530 North Division. By the time I'm done, I'm hoping you'll have a good understanding of the project at 530 North Division, but also more information on how to make a home that's better in every way, more comfortable, healthier to live in, and buildings that move us closer to carbon neutrality. So a brief history of how we got to right now with our homes is where I want to start. In our hierarchy of needs, shelter is the very first item. Buildings keep us warm and dry, which is obviously necessary for survival. Up until a couple hundred years ago, these are the types of shelters that most of the human population lived in. They're climate specific, they use locally abundant resources, and they're fully biodegradable. And I've spent brief periods of time staying in these native shelters, and they can be quite comfortable. You know, people were happy in these structures, and they spent time together singing ancient songs and doing the crafts necessary to keep them alive and telling stories. And most native cultures have a concept similar to what the Iroquois called the seventh generation. And that is to say that every decision a community made had to be made to benefit 7 generations into the future, their grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren, their progeny that did not yet exist. So as we move into more modern times, as the Industrial Revolution and the division of labor became the ruling ideology, we were able to standardize materials and ship them over long distances. Shelters evolved to be larger and have more amenities, and home building obviously became increasingly complex. The old growth lumber that could be sawn into long lengths was still widely available to make these what we would call balloon frame structures. And these homes took some skill to make. They were crafted with hand tools. So if your home was built prior to World War II, it's most likely a balloon frame structure. Their homes are very strong, and when natural disasters hit, sometimes they're the only houses left standing. They're sturdy, and old growth lumber itself is just an amazing material. After World War II, millions of homes were needed. The GI Bill and the advent of the 30-year mortgage by the federal government in the 1930s created a huge demand, more than ever before. The power of financing made owning a home a part of the American dream, and financing also made people be able to afford automobiles, and thus the suburbs were created. So in order to fulfill that demand, builders began to platform frame houses. It's a one-size-fits-all approach, and it was the same around the country, from Maine to Mississippi and Montana to Michigan. Platform frame houses are not very resource or energy efficient, though, and they're actually not very strong, but they can be built quickly with less skill needed to construct them. Power tools obviously sped up that curve greatly among carpenters as well. It took the energy shocks of the 70s for people to realize how much energy their homes were wasting. And the problem is that homes are complicated systems. So as people began tightening up and insulating their homes, problems started to appear. Now, I want to talk about something here called R value. And R value is a measure of how much resistant to heat flow a material or an assembly, like a wall in a home, has. The higher the R value, the more efficient it is at retaining its temperature. At an R value of 1.4 per inch, wood is a better conductor of energy than it is an insulator. And platform frame homes have a lot of wood that goes from inside to outside, and it kind of acts like a radiator fin of sorts. So the insulation between those wood members definitely increased the R value of wall assemblies, but other problems were created in the process. So yes, it definitely helped wall assemblies be more efficient, but it also introduces condensation, which can cause mold in a home if it's not able to dry out easily. And making our homes tighter and tighter was also part of that energy efficiency, and that created problems. Also, if you remember the 70s, you'll remember that we weren't exactly hip to the problems that toxic chemicals can cause health-wise at that time, or at least just starting to become aware. If you'll recall, rivers were catching fire in America during that time period. So tighter homes with lots of synthetic materials were making us sick. Now, toxic homes that waste energy are obviously nobody's goal, and it became clear that we needed to do better. Architects, builders, and building scientists began to work on that, and so next I want to talk about that regenerative path. I like this way of looking at the formula for getting to net zero. What it shows first and foremost is that the most important thing to get right is the thermal boundary of the home. And what do I mean by the thermal boundary? That's everything that from the bottom of the foundation all the way up to the peak of the roof. Look at how much of the total that is, that red part of it. If we get the building envelope right, everything flows from there. It's the most cost-effective way to reduce your energy consumption, and it's the thing that's hardest to retrofit later. If you get this right, you're well on your way. I call this lose less. Stop trying to heat the outside in the wintertime. Then we have to think about everything that uses energy in the home and find devices that are the most efficient for what we want them to do. Usually for a truly green home, that means going all electric, and this is what I call use less. Only after we've done that should we think about renewable energy. Should we think about renewable energy? This is solar in most cases, but you should really maximize your home's efficiency first. It's worth noting that if the energy you buy from the utility is made with renewable resources, at this point you're carbon neutral. Your home might not be net zero, but the home is carbon neutral. So this is why we are advocating for all electric homes. Our utilities may not be there yet, but renewable energy is already the cheapest form of energy out there. So as our utilities increasingly move to renewables, just based on pure economics, it's going to make it a lot easier for our buildings to be carbon neutral. So how do we get to the best thermal envelope for our home? Well, let me go back to the start when we first realized platform framing was not very efficient from an energy perspective. First thing builders and architects did was to ask, how can we reduce the wood in the frame of the home? Remember, wood's a poor insulator, so in the average home, wood makes up about 25% of the exterior wall, which is to say about 25% of the exterior of the home is barely insulated. So by taking a page from balloon framing methods, builders and architects started designing and building homes that take advantage of each home's unique load paths rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. This reduced the wood in the exterior walls from about 25% down to about 14%. Now combine that with 2x6 framing in lieu of 2x4 framing, that also provided more insulation in the exterior wall. So if you look at the picture in the bottom left corner here, you can see that the upper picture is standard platform framing and the lower picture is advanced framing. You can see the difference in the amount of wood, right? And so that's less materials and it's also more space for insulation. Picture on the right shows a home that we framed back in 2008. So you can see how the lumber stacks under the floor joists, and you can see how much insulation is in the walls. It works really actually pretty well. So if advanced framing works pretty well, we can still do better than that. And if wood is a thermal bridge, or basically conducting energy through the walls like a radiator fin, how could we defeat that? Thermal breaks are that thing, basically covering the entire exterior of the home like a wool coat. And this was the next improvement. The other thing it did was to help us defeat condensation issues in the wall cavities, which, as you can recall, can cause mold blooms in a tight home. We want a tight home because they're more efficient. Fully 40% of the energy that's heating and cooling energy that's lost in a normal home was lost through air convection through that building envelope. So a tight home helps with that. But we have to be worried about the condensation issue and our health. So in our climate zone, this down here is the formula that defeats the condensation issue. The thermal break on the outside of the home, that's this pink part here, and by the way, don't use the pink foam. But the R value of this thermal break should be 1/3 or 30%-ish, actually 30% or above of the total R value of this entire wall assembly. If we do this, we'll not only defeat the condensation in the wall cavity, but your home will also be a lot more efficient and comfortable. It works really well, and homes built with lumber should definitely be built with this method or you're losing a big opportunity. There are other methods to get excellent results in building buildings, great buildings. These are structural insulated panels up here, or SIPs. They're basically a foam sandwich panel with a large thermal break of EPS foam built into the filling of the sandwich. They're very strong, they're lightweight, they're quiet, and they're comfortable inside. A really good construction method. The next one down here is called insulated concrete forms, or ICFs. And in this case, the thermal break is actually on both sides with concrete poured in the middle. In this case, then the thermal breaks are like the bread of the sandwich. These ICF homes will last hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're also very efficient. Modular homes are enjoying something of a renaissance these days. You can see, I'm sorry, I lost my, oh, there we go. You can see here. This was the first LEED Platinum modular house east of California. It's a beautiful custom house we built for a client of ours. And it went from being a hole in the ground to a house ready for finishes in just 1 week. So there's a lot of ways to get there, but in all cases, an efficient structure is key. And it's important to note that the wall sections are only part of the wall, though. And over the last 30 years, the amount of glass in homes has gone from about 10% of the window to wall ratio to more than 20%. And that makes sense because people love natural light. It's biophilic and we're drawn to that. But windows can represent a low R value hole in the envelope of a home, and they can really degrade the efficiency of a wall assembly. Windows have also seen a lot of advancement in the last couple decades, and we've gone from single pane glass windows being kind of a standard with a really low R value to triple pane windows and even quadruple pane windows in some cases, thermally broken assemblies. Sometimes these windows can have a higher R value than code minimum wall sections, which is pretty incredible. The Europeans have really figured the whole window thing out. So on the left here, you see a high-end triple pane American window, and on the right, you'll see a kind of a lower-end European window. They're about the same price, and while they're both triple pane, the American version is just a normal window with 3 panes of glass. It's better, and it's still a nice window, but the one on the right has fully 5 gaskets in between here, and it's a tilt and turn window, so it's easy to clean all from the inside, both inside and out. You can clean from the inside, and as you can see, it's just much better constructed, so there's less warping and things like that in the wood. So good windows are an important part of an efficient home. So here's a formula that's good to remember. If your home has a window to wall ratio above 15%, it's time to move to triple pane windows. This will be a bigger improvement than adding more insulation to the wall assembly at that point. And by the way, you'll feel more comfortable in the home. The triple pane windows just feel great when you're standing next to them. So we don't use a lot of great windows here in America, but we should. There are an increasing amount of manufacturers that are making those great windows in the United States and Canada, though. And European imports are also becoming more affordable, but they are an important part of an efficient home. Now, once you've optimized the building envelope, it's time to look at all of the things in the home that use energy. Generally speaking, electrical devices are about 2 to 4 times more energy efficient than their fossil fuel equivalent. Electrical energy can also be made with renewable resources. So if we need to get off carbon, and we do, that means we need to stop burning it in our buildings and also at our power plants. Now, we've made great strides in technology over the last 20 years, and we're really optimizing things over the last 10. We're still behind Asian and European countries, but we are catching up. So once you have a home that was built to be efficient, going all electric can really ramp up that efficiency to the next level. We start with heat pumps. So you have a heat pump in your home already. Refrigerators and air conditioners are heat pumps. They keep a vessel, whether it's your refrigerator or your whole home, at a cooler temperature than the surrounding air. Heating and cooling electrically just means that the heat pump has a cycle that you can go both ways with. They're generally very efficient, much more so than burning fossil fuels. Now, while there's a cost disparity between fossil fuels like natural gas and electricity, when you look at the energy consumption, electrical devices are the clear winner from that perspective. And they don't make carbon dioxide if that electricity is generated with renewables. With a heat pump, they have what's called a heat sink, and that's the place that you're exchanging energy with. It can be the ground, which is known as a geothermal system, or it can be the outside air, which is also known as an air source heat pump. In the last 10 years, these systems have become a lot more efficient. So air source heat pumps have really, even in the last couple of years, have really become impressive. Being able to heat a house with full efficiency down into the negative temperatures. So imagine being able to heat a home efficiently using that -5, -10 degree outside air, because that's what the state of the art is now. Heating and cooling is our biggest energy consumer in Michigan, but next is hot water. We can use heat pumps for those too, and they can be very efficient. The next item is our appliances and our lighting. Appliances continue to get more and more efficient. In fact, about every 10 years, the efficiency of appliances doubles. Similarly, LED lighting has totally arrived in the last 10 years. It's dimmable, it's available in multiple color spectrums, it's full of features that are not available with other incandescent type of lighting or halogen. So it's hard to make an argument for other types of lighting at this point. So while LEDs are still more expensive up front, they last a lot longer. And over the life of a single bulb, an LED light will save about $200, and that's per bulb. You also won't have to change that light bulb about 8 times, which is not factored into that calculation. And I don't know about you, but I hate changing light bulbs. So there are other appliances that we use in an all-electric home that in many cases would be the counterparts who burn fossil fuels in America. The first is an induction cooktop, which is an electrically based cooktop that uses magnetism to heat the pots and pans, not the surface of the range itself. And they're really highly efficient. I have one now, and I can tell you they work great. And I'm somebody that loves to cook. They're really controllable in terms of the temperature, and they heat the pots more evenly so that things burn less. And you can also boil a pot of water a lot faster. So I cook with one, and I don't feel like I'm missing anything. And you know, I'm somebody back in my apartment days that I would select an apartment based on whether it had a gas stove or not. So I feel like it may not be for everybody, but they have come a long way and they're very efficient. Next are condensing dryers. So these are dryers that also use a heat pump to dry clothes, and the moisture goes down the same drain that that you would have the washer used for the washer. So these are super efficient, and in Europe they just call them dryers because it would be silly to buy any other type. With a condensing dryer, you also don't need to punch a 4-inch hole in the side of your house, and also subject yourself to the possibility of a lint fire, which are a major cause of fires in the United States, actually, at about 3,000 per year. So when you put it all together, a really great building envelope and very efficient appliances and lighting in a home, you get a fundamentally different type of building and a very rigorous building standard. If you maximize everything for efficiency, you get to a passive house standard. And simply put, a passive home is a home that uses the least amount of energy possible and still has a payoff period. It's a long-term payoff period, let's say in the range of about 15 years, but there is one. Now, you could make those walls 4 feet thick and put 10 panes of glass in those windows and things like that, but that would never pay off, and the incremental gain that you would get would be so small. So passive standards are scientifically measured to maximize results with a reasonable payoff period. Some number of years ago, people tended to think of passive homes as some kind of weird-looking science experiment, and to be perfectly honest, maybe the first ones that were built in the 1970s and the early 80s kind of were in some cases. But I can assure you they can be quite beautiful. This home was built to passive standards, and it's a gem. These homes are super cozy to live in, and they're also resilient. What do I mean by resilient? Well, this home lost power for 5 days during a cold stretch of winter a few years ago, and the inside temperature never fell below 61 degrees with no heat in the house. So they were able to live in the home while their neighbors had to make other arrangements. But another great thing about passive homes is that you can keep the moisture levels in the home at about a 40 to 45% relative humidity in the winter, and the windows won't sweat and you won't get mold growth because nothing is condensing. So that's great for your health. Studies show that those higher levels of humidity protect us from colds and other viruses, and your nasal passages will remain moist and happy. But higher humidity is also great for comfort in the home because higher humidity means that we feel warmer even when the ambient temperature is lower. So humidity makes things feel warmer. It is more expensive to build a passive house up front for sure, but it does have a payoff period, and probably you'll never regret living in a home like this. Now, when you live in a tight and energy efficient home, you have to think about your indoor air quality. It's not healthy to live in a thermos bottle without fresh air. We ventilate homes with a device called an energy recovery ventilator, or ERV. These devices take stale air from inside the home and exchange it with fresh air from outside. Now, you've already paid to condition that air once, however, so an efficient ERV can recover up to 90% of the energy, the heat energy in the outgoing air, and also about 50% of the moisture content, which is a form of energy as well. We call that latent energy. An even better part of ERVs, though, is that we can target where we want to take the stale air from and where we deliver fresh air to. So we take stale air from overly moist areas or those with pollutants and odors in the air, like kitchens, bathrooms, and utility rooms. And then the system will take that preconditioned fresh air and put them into areas like bedrooms and living rooms. So this is a lot better than having a leaky house that indiscriminately loses energy in an uncontrolled fashion, usually from the basement and attic, which doesn't give us much of a health benefit or comfort benefit. So we like to use ERVs to replace bath fans as well, because kind of like a bath fan is a little bit like blowing money out of the house. I retrofit an ERV into our home a few years ago, well, several years ago, and we noticed a big difference in our air quality. Most houses should have these devices, but few actually do. Now, when we look at the energy consumption of homes over the years, we see some changes. In this case, for this slide, the relative size of the circle is the amount of energy used on average by these homes. So when we look at the 1950 and the 2015 energy code, they look pretty similar, but you have to consider that our homes are considerably bigger now. And we also have air conditioning, which was not at all standard in the 1950s. We also use a lot more hot water than Americans did in the 50s. And we have a lot more stuff that uses energy. We have computers and more appliances, more TVs, more lighting, etc. We call all these things that are not the heating and cooling system or hot water, we call those base load. Now look at the relative size of the 2015 energy code. This is the standard that we're using in Michigan versus the 2021 code that's soon to be released. The energy code coming out in 2021 is already standard on the West Coast states and in Massachusetts, and it's close to passive building standards for the building envelope. When you build a home like this, you're building a home that what the U.S. Department of Energy calls a zero-ready home. That is to say, a modest-sized solar array can make this home go net zero. And you can see graphically how much energy we're saving by building just with these passive house techniques. Also, we can see how much more of a percentage that base load becomes. It's not that we're using more, it's just that that's how much less everything else is using. So Michigan and many states probably won't adopt the 2021 energy code for many years after it's released if past history is a guide, but we should. This is a necessity to fight climate change, in my opinion. We should be doing better with our energy codes, and I hope we will sooner rather than later. Now, I love all this building science stuff, and the nerd in me can really geek out on it, but there's another angle to consider here besides purely carbon neutrality. We have to figure out our place in the world again. As I mentioned, there's nearly 8 billion of us now, and we can no longer afford to treat the planet as if our resources will never run out, or like it's our species' personal toilet bowl. We need a healthy ecosystem around us to be healthy ourselves, and when we violate that, we eventually find out that we are not immune to natural law. The Earth itself, after all, is a closed system. We have produced trillions of pounds of these chemicals and released them into the ecosystem. These are incompatible with life on Earth, and in many cases, they don't break down very easily and they build up in our ecosystem. Beyond poisoning our natural systems, these chemicals can also cause us health problems as well. You know, there's, just to pick a couple, there's PFAS chemicals, and those are used in all kinds of things, nonstick cookware and stain-resistant fabric and carpets. We use them in fire retardants and flame-proof items in our homes and a variety of other things. They also cause endocrine disruption, cancer, liver and thyroid disease, and a whole spectrum of other effects. They're called forever chemicals because they stick around for centuries in the environment or longer. They don't burn. There's also bisphenols, which are in the lining of our food cans and our water bottles. The thermal receipts we get from stores and restaurants has bisphenols in it. And they're being phased out, but for a long, long time, many baby products had them and a variety of other items. They cause brain and behavioral problems, especially in developing kids, and heart and artery problems in adults as well as cancer. So that's just to name a couple. All of these compounds individually are proven to cause a whole spectrum of conditions, one by one, that you see here, but we're not even close to being aware of how they interact with each other when they combine in our bodies in kind of a toxic stew. And what we really don't know is how they impact other species, especially things like marine life, where we haven't really fully studied their biological processes because they're different from mammals. These chemicals are in everything, including building products and many of the things we bring in our homes every day. Now, they also make many wonderful products possible, from food storage, garden hoses, safety products, all those kinds of things. It's not that they aren't useful, but like so many things that make our lives better, they could also be degrading our health and the health of our ecosystem. I actually find a lot of hope here, though. There's a lot of really great things happening in the field of green chemistry, and there's a world of innovation that is still available, where things like carpet and paint and finished products have historically been pretty toxic. We're getting better and better at making these products to be more healthy and still do the things we want them to do. These days, a lot of companies are figuring out how to make their products healthier and how to produce them with less waste and less toxic in manufacturers. And there's a lot of success stories out there. I like to look for things like this declare label. It lets you know that the product is made in an ecologically responsible manner. And in just a few years, the number of products in these declare databases and other databases of healthy products has been growing exponentially. So given a reason, like their customers are demanding better products, many companies are rising to the challenge. A guy named William McDonough wrote a book called Cradle to Cradle, which talks a lot about this transformation. In a living future, all products would either be biological nutrients that can break down and become food for another organism, or technical nutrients that can be recycled infinitely without degradation. In this manner, our systems would mimic how nature deals with waste products, and we would reduce our heavy footprint on the earth substantially. It's a revolutionary concept, but it's also real simple, and that is to say there's no somewhere else. We can't just keep dumping our waste products out there and thinking that it doesn't impact anything or anyone else. So let's make our waste always useful to somebody or something else. Because if we can't be a part of our natural system, where is our place on the planet? William McDonough also said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but if you're trying to get to Canada but you're driving to Mexico, slowing down won't help. In the last couple decades, we've been building green. Most of it has been really about slowing down. And actually that was important because we had to learn and we had to create demand for better products so that manufacturers could find a market for them and produce them cost effectively. But this is what I really love about this certification program, the Living Building Challenge. This program turns the car around. They call it the Living Building Challenge for a reason. It's very difficult. But I suspect if we're going to be successful in changing the world, this is the kind of thinking that'll have to become more common. So it might be on the bleeding edge now, but a lot of commonplace things in our lives once were. So with all that as a background, I want to talk about the proposed projects at 530 North Division. I felt like it was important to explain the why and the how of this project so it'll appear more in context, because if it exists, it must be possible. So someone has to take these first steps, and more of these kind of projects are popping up around the country. More and more people are becoming aware of the things they can do with their own life to make changes. Good policy is also good politics. So this is an aerial map of the Kerrytown area of Ann Arbor, and you can see Zingerman's Deli up here in the corner. Down here at the corner of Detroit Street and Division Street, you see this this triangular flat iron building here. This was constructed a few years ago right across the street from 530 North Division, which is our subject property. This is located in the old 4th Ward Historic District of Kerrytown. So these are the Sanborn maps that show the time period when this building first acquired its present form. So this property is actually 2 homes that were conjoined, and a new roof line was put over both of them to cover them. We're fairly certain that this project began in 1929 and ended sometime in 1930. But the original house, the one you see here on the left over here, was originally built in the 1860s by a man named John Gates. And he ran a saloon in the old train station where the Gandy Dancer is these days. Now, somewhere in the early 1870s, a man named George Miller bought the house. Now, he was a German immigrant and he ran a business making pumps. George died in 1901, and the family members continued to live in the house until it became a rental house in about 1910. About 1929, the site that houses the Flatiron Building became a gas station for all those newfangled cars that had all but replaced horses in town. And we think that the house that was on that site was moved across the street to be conjoined with this original house. In those days, people didn't tear down houses very often because they represented a lot of values in materials and workmanship. So mostly they were moved, and this was no exception. And the conjoined home then became a boarding house. There's really not a lot of records about this property and no photos that we could find. But this is the front of the house now and the form of the building that took shape with the new roof lines when the homes were joined. The roof line is constructed of 2x4s that span 22 feet. They're propped up with other 2x4s that rest on the ceiling joists, which are also 2x4s. So to say that this is severely undersized would be a big understatement. The only reason this building is still standing is because old growth lumber is just an amazing material. The building was clearly remade to house people as cheaply as possible with not a lot of thought for aesthetics or long-term structural integrity. True to form, the building has been hacked at and chopped up pretty badly over the decades, and no original materials really remain except for some clapboards that are under a layer of asphalt siding and then under the layer of this current vinyl siding. So I'd like to find out what condition those original clapboards are in when we start the project, and I will reuse them if possible, as well as I will do everything I can to reuse every part of the building that can be recycled. This is a picture from the corner of Detroit and Division Street. When my wife and I purchased this home in 1999, it was in rough shape. There were homeless people living in the basement and in a first floor apartment. It was pretty grim inside. This is a picture from the rear of the home, and I knew when we bought it that it would need major structural work at some point in the future. So I spent about a year fixing up all of the very needed cosmetics of the interior, and in the process I decided that I wanted to become a contractor full-time. So shortly after finishing the project, I quit my job at the U of M Cancer Center. 21 years later, this building still needs to be rebuilt. I've been working with the City of Ann Arbor since 2017 trying to make this project fly, and I'm hoping that in 2020 we can clear the remaining hurdles and fix this building in the most ecologically responsible way possible. So with any luck, starting in June of 2021, we will go start construction to go from this to this. So this to this. Now, the design is continuing to evolve, but this is a real close approximation of what we want the end product to look like. Here's a line drawing of the north view, and this is what you'd see from the corner of Detroit Street. This is a line drawing from the south view, and this is what you'd see walking north towards the Broadway Bridge. This is a dollhouse view from the southwest. And here's a dollhouse view from the southeast. It's a real challenge for this building to be net positive energy, as I must do to meet the Living Building Challenge standards. And there's really no other way of making it than to also meet passive house standards. Otherwise, I wouldn't have enough space on the lot, even if this carport roof is fully made of solar panels as well. So that's the power of building passive, though, because it's the only way that I would be able to bring this house to Living Building Challenge standards without having to completely cover the rest of the site with solar panels, which I can't do. This is there is an addition on the building, and this is adding 28% of the total footprint that's currently under a roof. This is currently a 4-unit apartment building, and it is to remain a 4-unit apartment building, but we're increasing density on the property so that the project is viable financially. This is a streetscape analysis, and you can see that the existing building does not really match the other historic structures whose shapes have mostly remained unaltered on the block. So to me, it kind of looks like a broken tooth on the block. And in designing the new roof line, we tried to match not only the roof pitches, but also the shed dormer arrangements that are so common on the block and in the neighborhood. It also would have been uncommon for the original homes to have such a low slung pitch like we have at present. So we wanted the front facade to read as the 2 homes that they originally were. The new project has a lot more rhythm with the streetscape, and it's made to be a long-term asset to the community. So net positive energy, keeping and reusing all the stormwater on site, and full of ecological enhancements, and hopefully beautifying the street as well. So this project is currently designed to become the world's first multifamily building to achieve both Living Building Challenge and Passive House certifications. The building will also be going after LEED Platinum, Department of Energy Zero Ready program, and the Well Building certification. So that's all fine and well, but what do these certifications do for us? Well, first of all, they allow us to measure and quantify what we're doing. All of these have third parties that test the outcomes. That's to verify that we are actually building what we say we're going to build or what is designed. Secondly, it allows us to communicate process methods and results to others who are looking to build this way as well. It's really the way we learn and create a database of knowledge for others to access. And yet another benefit is that these programs actually add value to the building. Studies show that people will pay about 10% more for a high-level certification when the building sells. And so it creates value to know that it's built for the long term. Now, clearly we can't rebuild every building in America to meet these standards. That's impractical. But I wanted to talk a little bit about replacement and remodeling as well, because if we make the right decisions going forward, we can also get there with respect to carbon neutrality. The Meadowlark headquarters on West Liberty is a pretty good example of that. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2030 as a company, not only in the building, but also with our vehicles and our job sites too. So when we bought this building, it was an energy hog and there were a lot of fixes needed. It's really solidly built and we love the building, but every surface needed repair. There were roof leaks and the furnaces were old and a lot of things needed replacement. So in about 2012, we started picking away at the building. A couple years after that, we took out a Michigan Saves loan to replace the leaking roof. And using the loan, it also allowed us to go solar and add a whole lot of insulation and air sealing to the building. You can see here that we're adding nail-based panels, which are a 4-inch thermal break over the entire roof. That's that thick foam section that separates the framing of the roof from the outside. And then over that, there's actually a ventilation space too, so that we can ventilate that roof. This is, so underneath also we have about 12 inches of insulation. So this is the best kind of roof you can have. We started measuring our energy consumption and we found out that our well had a cracked head casing and it never stopped running, which was consuming almost half of our total annual solar output. Now, because the well is located in a concrete bunker adjacent to the building, we would never have really known that. We wouldn't have heard it without measuring our energy consumption. And I am sure that there are millions of homes in America right now that have that same issue. It's a lot of energy to pump up water, which is heavy, and then have it just fall back down. So we needed a new well and we needed a new furnace, so we went geothermal in the building, and here we are putting that geothermal system in. We also took the opportunity to replace this area with a native prairie, which is our eventual goal for the whole site. We'd actually like to attract some meadowlarks, which need native prairie plants in order to survive. And I can tell you just from the first few years of it, the biomass and the life energy in that native prairie is tenfold what it is in the places with the normal grass lawn. It's pretty amazing. So every step of the way, when we had something we had to fix or could improve the building, we made the right choices for the long term. Now, the acronym EUI stands for Energy Use Intensity, and it's a measure that's used to compare the energy use of one building to another, and in that way it normalizes them for square footage and other factors. An EUI of 0 is a zero energy building. So over here on the right, you see 75.2. This is the average office building in the state of Michigan, has an EUI of 75.2. With the work we've done, we've gotten ours down to 12.2, which makes it one of the most efficient office buildings in the entire state. We didn't do backflips and we didn't have to break the bank. We simply made the right choices, borrowing money where necessary and using financing programs along the way to help. And now we're within striking distance of net zero, at least for our building. And oh yeah, by the way, the building is all electric now. So this can be done over time without having to do heroics. You just have to make the right decisions along the way. And by the way, that can be done easily over a 10-year period for many, many homes. So the biggest thing is that all of us have a part to play. We all live in buildings. We all have a profession that probably is something that the world can use in this regard. Making decisions in our own homes and using that expertise in whatever field we're in, or just really even simply advocating for the needed change in our policies. There are a few professions or vocations that can't play a part in solving this problem. Even oil drillers have a role, because putting carbon back underground will become important in the future, and it could become a big industry. Our country needs advocates, and I would say that the time for fence sitting on this issue is over. We need to pick a team, and hopefully your team will be the same as mine, which is Team Healthy Future Generations. So if I look at the world of building and construction, this would be my list of things that need to happen to meet this challenge. First, we need massive infrastructure investment and massive investment in green infrastructure. We need to bring America's considerable economic and scientific might to bear and give them a profit motive and a reason to engage. Now, I know what you're thinking is, who's going to pay for that? Well, if we just reallocated the subsidies that the fossil fuel industry gets every single year, despite being the most profitable industry on the face of the planet for an entire century, there would be more than enough money right there. Otherwise, we're going to continue to subsidize killing off our grandchildren, and there's just really no other way to look at it. So I'm not advocating killing the fossil fuel industry, by the way, because I believe they have a role to play. I just don't think taxpayers should have to give them hundreds of billions of dollars a year in subsidies either. I also believe that their prowess will help us solve a lot of technological problems. In a related point, our electrical grid is outdated and in poor shape, one of the worst in the world. It's wasting energy on an almost unimaginable scale. We need to completely rebuild our grid for energy, renewable energy, and for storage mechanisms. And that in itself would create many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs. We need to use the power of financing and the tax code to incentivize the right behaviors. Financing is the most significant invention in human history, literally inventing money that doesn't yet exist to do big things that otherwise couldn't be done. Financing built the housing and the auto industry, and it can build a green economy. If you give people the right incentives, I guarantee they'll do the right thing. Electrifying houses just makes economic sense. So if we can harness the power of financing and tax codes to help people make their lives better and save money in the process, they will make the right decisions. Next, we need to adopt the 2021 building code as soon as possible. Now, I'm a builder, and I'm a member of organizations that will fight this tooth and nail, because to them, this is heresy. I understand the reasons behind this, but they're only looking at this issue from one lens, which is housing affordability, which is important. But it helps if you give contractors an incentive to change and the tools to do so. I always believe that carrots work better than sticks. Now, sometimes sticks are necessary too, but you meet people halfway and they'll probably do the right things. The last one, Saul Griffiths, who is a noted physicist, an inventor, and an entrepreneur, lists municipal bureaucracy as one of his top 5 things that will inhibit our transition to a green economy. So speaking from experience, getting through all the layers of complexity and the different silos that exist can take years, and it can also cost an exorbitant amount of money. And it's like this all over America. This is not how our cities developed in the first place, though, and if they had, a lot of the charm and character that we love would be gone. So we have to find a way to strip this down and get rid of the huge amount of obstacles that exist. And cities need to develop clear end goals that also allow flexibility, particularly when many of the properties in the older parts of the cities don't conform to the zoning rules that are in place now, and they never did. So if you offer developers a way to work together to get to faster and less costly answers, cities could probably achieve their overarching goals more easily with more buy-in. I love these murals at the Detroit Institute of Arts by Diego Rivera, and I love them because they show a nation at work, transforming our society and creating the future. I also love them because our diversity and our immigrant spirit has always been a key to our success in America. And you see here in these pictures, all colors and all creeds working together. America has been a leader in the world in a way that no other country can be because we come from every other country. Now, America, when properly motivated, can do amazing things. When our country was called to enter World War II, Washington called Detroit and told us the country needed 300,000 bombers and 100,000 tanks, and we needed to start producing them right now. Despite the fact that not one single plan existed to make them, in 4 years, that is what we produced. We were the arsenal that beat back fascism in the 19th century and saved democracy in the world. When the war was over and Europe and Japan were in tatters, the US showed its generosity, and it made the smart calculation that working economies were far less likely to fall back into war. We rebuilt those countries with the Marshall Plan, and we made ourselves the undisputed world leader in the process. We built the interstate system in 10 years, and we put a man on the moon in 8 years with less computing power than is in my smartphone. So in every one of these cases, the economy prospered as a result of taking on these ambitious projects. We need to understand that we're in a much larger crisis now, and unless we stop burning fossil fuels over the next decade and use our influence to ensure the rest of the world follows suit, this current pandemic that we're in will seem like the best of times in the future. We also just really need to regain our imagination as a country. We can do great and heroic things, but we need to steel our political will to solve this problem. "74% of the American population believes that climate change is a serious problem that we need to solve. When this experience of COVID-19 is behind us, we'll have the chance to look at our policies and our governance with fresh eyes. We also probably are going to need to rebuild our economy to some extent. So what a unique opportunity for us to address this enormous problem. I'm not asking anybody to sacrifice lifestyle or comfort one iota. In fact, just the opposite. We can have an even better lifestyle with these green technologies that include all electric homes and buildings. I'm also not saying we should sacrifice economically. A World War II style mobilization of keeping our planet at a safe temperature for the future would give us the best economy the world has ever known and reclaim America's rightful place as a world leader again. So we don't have to choose between a bad thing and a worse thing if we address this problem. But the biggest thing is that there's really no alternative to decarbonizing our economy. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, or we will be leaving our 7th generation a wasteland to contend with. The longer we wait, the more it'll cost to mitigate the bad effects that will happen, and the more impractical it will become to solve the issue at all. So we have to stop waiting for these crises to be fully upon us before we act as a country. Now, I'm an optimist, and I believe in the human spirit, and I also believe that humans have an important role to play in a healthy ecosystem. I believe we can come together and solve this problem, but I'm not naive, and I do know that very powerful forces are lined up against this change, and they're going to do everything in their power to continue to divide us. It's really easy to believe this is too big for us to solve, and it's even easier to fall into a cycle of cynicism or despair. But when we do, the forces of darkness win. So I know this fight will not be easy, but when we look at any social change that's happened over the last century or even the last couple decades, we see that what can be seen now as completely barbaric or just plain wrong, and at one time was an ideology that ruled the day. So think of slavery and women's suffrage, child labor, labor rights, workers' rights, and Jim Crow. This list goes on and on. All of these changes happened because ordinary people got fed up and said enough is enough. And when that happens, that change can happen very quickly. That's what we need at this point. Now, humans have never lived in a more prosperous, safe, and comfortable era. The knowledge and technology that we have at our fingertips is nothing short of amazing. All of us want peace, prosperity, health, and a life of opportunity. But we have to ask ourselves the question if we have the will and fortitude to ensure that our grandchildren and their grandchildren will have these same opportunities. Because if so, we need to organize our politics and our policy around their lives, our seventh generation. This is the very meaning of the struggle of good over evil despite the odds. And I believe it is our moral duty to think of those future generations and engage in this fight. We all have to decide what we will do with the great gift of time that has been given us on this planet. Thank you.
Hey, Doug. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And everybody, we have a lot of time for questions. I see some questions coming in now. We definitely want to get to all your questions, and especially those of you in Ann Arbor with some questions and concerns specifically to the development of this project. We definitely want to make sure that we get to all your questions first, so please put them in. If you want to raise your hand, we'll try to unmute you if it works, and you can ask it verbally, which I think is great. If that doesn't work out so well or you don't want to, you're shy, you can put it right into the chat box. And just real quick, as those questions are pouring in, a big thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, all of our members like Doug here, and all of our sponsors who help fund us to do these kinds of sessions. Check out Mitsubishi to get to net zero all-electric heat pump with ease. Ream for heat pump hot water heaters, all electric systems that work. I've got one. And our big sponsor, Build Equinox for smart ventilation that detects pollution, runs real low energy, and ramps up to exhaust it when it's in your house. So let's take a look here at some of these questions coming in. I'm seeing if there's any hands raised. I did, I guess, wanted to talk maybe a little bit about engagement here. There were some chatter on the chat while you were going about how do citizens, get involved with changing the state code, especially the energy code in our state? Do you have any input on that and what that process looks like?
I mean, I feel like part of that is just good old-fashioned calling your representatives and saying that we need to do that. I think also individual localities can be more restrictive than the state code. So this might be something that happens city by city too. But also, the state has the LARA. I forget exactly what that stands for, but they are the ones that that manage the professional licenses and things like that. And so I think it's just good old-fashioned calling people and letting them know that this is something that you're interested in. Myself and other sort of progressive builders do a lobby for this occasionally, and I think sort of a bigger thing is that frequently we work inside those organizations to tell the older builders or the ones that are worried about it, skeptical even, that it's going to be okay. This is okay. We can move to all electric homes. We can do these things, and in fact, it's going to make us better as builders. And when we have that honest debate, I don't find a lot of people that really push back on the facts of the merit. It's just that it can seem really scary to builders is all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Jeff, if you want to jump in. Can you hear us? No. Can you hear us, Jeff? Can you speak? I think I see your question in the chat too, so we can get to it there if it didn't work out. Sorry about that. Well, another question that came in was how and what will you do to rebuild the structure?
The structure is really going to be, so rebuilding the structure is a lot of it is we have to lift it up and we have to kind of take it apart, and then we're rebuilding it basically using the studs and the floor joists and all those pieces and parts again. But we will have to move windows around and stuff like that. You know, it's not going to be the same building. The other thing is with a passive envelope, we have to skin the outside of the building. That is to say that we have to put about 6 inches of insulation on the outside of those in order to achieve a true energy efficiency. We are taking off all of the cladding that we can find on the building, and it probably won't be enough to do the entire building, but I will be seeking other recycled antique cladding. One of the things I really love, I've stripped about 3 or 4 houses personally myself, and stripped them down to bare wood, the cladding down to bare wood, and put a rain screen on to keep the moisture in good shape, and put them back on the buildings. And I just love the way old siding looks. It's got a texture that you just can't replicate. And so essentially every single part of the building that we can use, which is all the lumber and the siding that we can reuse, and everything else will be recycled into the new building, or will go to Habitat for Humanity if it's something like a sink that I can't use or something. So really the only thing that I can't recycle there is like the old drywall, and there is some areas of plaster in the building and things like that. Some flooring that's where the tongues are showing and it's not going to be salvageable. But everything else that we can salvage, we're going to salvage. And I hope to have that go back into the building, because I really want it to have that character. It doesn't actually quite have it now. It's vinyl sided and it's pretty beat up, old finishes. I did what I could to salvage them at the time, and they looked good for a long time, but it's ready for a remodel for sure.
Great, thanks. Jeff, that was my fault. Why don't you give it another shot?
Yes, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Chris and I are both sitting here. We live in the Old Fourth Ward, not too far away from this project. We're very excited about it. But I got to tell you, Doug, this was an amazing presentation. I did not expect this. It's much broader than we expected. And I do think that I looked at the list of attendees, and we have to get this presentation out to more people. So my question is, how can we share this presentation with others?
Yeah, that's a great question. We'll have it recorded and it'll be available right away, and send a link to all of you, and you all can share it out as you like. It'll be open source. Anyone can watch it for free. So thank you.
Okay. I'd like to make a comment also. You talked about the building that was attached to the house that sat on that site, and you thought maybe it came from the triangle area where the Flatiron building is now. There's never been any evidence that there was a house on that site. It was a barn, but it could have been a barn that was moved too. It was very common practice. There are a number of houses in the Old Fourth Ward Historic District that were moved, either moved into this area or moved from one street to the other. So that's another mystery, but there was never any evidence of a house sitting on that triangular piece of property.
Well, you definitely can be right. Susan Weinberg and I went through that, and she did. The same time period, but there was not many records. Susan really went through all of the Bentley archives and everything else. We found one photo from the far side of Detroit Street that was really actually a picture of the gas station, but it just happened to have a grainy photo of the house in the background. So that was really the only thing we could find. But she did find out a lot about the people who lived in the building, and that was pretty interesting.
John, you got a question? Go ahead.
I do. Thanks, Doug. This is John Mursky. I was wondering if you could talk about the implications of the project for Ann Arbor's carbon neutrality target. as you know, and most of us know in Ann Arbor, that roughly 40 to 50% of people live in multifamily dwellings. So I was wondering if you could talk about this as a demo project and maybe a little bit about what you see as the financial payback for people like yourself and other landlords.
Right. Well, I would say that is really the biggest reason I wanted to go sort of all the way with this building, was because, you know, as all of us know, student rental houses are some of the worst offenders. They're not some of them, they are the worst offenders as a class of homes. And a lot of times there's not really a big financial incentive for property owners to improve them because the tenants end up paying the bills. And so it just becomes one of those things that's, you know, they obviously are trying to maximize profit. And I understand that. But my feeling was if I built this for the long term, if I built this as a 30, 40 looking 30, 40 years into the future, I think that the actual extra money that I will put into this building, not making it something that that is, you know, the cheapest it can be made essentially. You know, I'll be having things, I have to have things like metal roofs and solar panels and all this stuff. But if you take into account all of the energy that I'll be saving, all of the water that I'll be saving, and all of those things added up, my feeling, and I don't have enough information to do the math, but back of the envelope calculations is that it's got about a 20 to 25 year payoff period. So it's long, but this is also a building that's going far, far further than most would need to even approach carbon neutrality. Because remember, if the utilities are making electricity in a renewable fashion, all you have to do is make your home efficient enough to be able to go electric, and you can get there. So I wanted to also mention that, you know, part of the reason for this project was to try and meet those 2030 goals and do something that would spur that along and make a great example for not just people who own rental houses, but also for people that own any building in Ann Arbor. And it's difficult, but it's not that difficult, and there is a good reason to do it. I also you know, have been working with, we have a great Office of Sustainability in Ann Arbor, and the director of the Office of Sustainability has made a really good plan for how to get Ann Arbor to carbon neutrality by 2030. And you know, I want to say that I really support that work. And if people are looking for something to do to solve these problems, I believe that that, you know, it starts one city at a time. We're not getting a lot of leadership at the federal or state level. So it has to happen city by city. And, you know, Ann Arbor can be an example of a city that is doing the right thing and thereby providing sort of a case study for other cities in the future that are going to be looking to do this. So to me, it's really important to support that plan. And I would urge people who are in Ann Arbor and on this webinar to call their city council reps and ask them to vote yes on the sustainability plan for Ann Arbor and vote to fully fund it.
So I see another question here, a text question. Do you think multifamily dwellings have a bigger future in Ann Arbor residential areas to primarily address affordability?
Boy, I mean, it certainly helps. I mean, it's so expensive in Ann Arbor to do anything. You know, I come across people that are moving from California and New York City all the time, and they think that there's going to be this huge, you know, price disparity. Well, actually, if you're moving from some places in California, there is, but they're always surprised that Ann Arbor is as expensive as it is. So I think one of the ways to solve that is through density, and I do know that that's a goal of the city, is to increase density, and there's good reasons for that. That's just kind of public policy 101 in some ways, is to reduce the stress on our roads and with the car traffic coming in by increasing density and therefore providing more affordability for housing in the city. We lost your audio there, Brett.
Hey, Roland, we have you unmuted if you want to talk real quick.
Yeah, I just was wondering if you have a lot of experience dealing with historical commissions, and is there any pushback with respect to reaching carbon neutrality when you're dealing with these traditional historical districts? And how do you contend with that?
Well, I'd like to say first off that I think historic districts are important in an older city. I think we lose a lot of our character if those are not taken care of carefully. I also think that there's probably some middle ground between don't touch them at all and let's do the right thing for that property. And so in this case, this was in the historic district, it still is. It was designated as a contributing structure. I spent quite a considerable amount of time going back and forth with the historic district, and eventually we were able to show that this building did not have enough characteristics of it, of a historic building to be called a contributing asset. So it is now non-contributing. But I actually hope that in the process of doing this, that in some ways I can make this building more contributing. And I don't know if I could relist it as a historic structure at the end of it, but you know, I think that would be kind of cool. And so in some ways, I think that that this is a discussion that really needs to be had between, you know, the people who most advocate for historic districts and the rest of the population, especially developers and things like that, because these districts are important to the fabric of a city. There's no question about it. But we have to look at technology. We have to look at the things that we should be allowed to do to these structures, and we have to look at how we can make them sort of enter the modern era and not be truly dinosaurs. And I think like a good example of that is when the historic district in Ann Arbor decided that solar panels were okay on a historic home. Those are good decisions because, you know, they allow us to bring a home into the modern era. And in fact, you know, Matt Grokoff's home over on South 7th Street is, you know, the country's oldest net zero home. And that is a historic structure, so it can be done.
We got a lot more time for questions. If people want to raise their hands and talk, or if you're a little shy, put them in the chat box. Here's one from Ginny. Also, what steps are still required before this project can begin? Are there places where advocacy is needed?
I don't know the answer to that because I've never really been through a multifamily project before. I'm predominantly a single family home builder and a remodeler, or at least our Meadowlark is. And so this is kind of a new experience for me too. My feeling is that the advocacy that I would go for is that, you know, I feel like in municipal settings, everybody there wants to do a good job. They all care about their jobs and the things that need to happen. But I see things that happen in silos a lot, and it makes it really hard to go from one entity to the other, especially when one person's realm conflicts with what another person's might be or something like that. So I think there's, Saul Griffiths is right. There's a lot of room here for us to improve these processes and make them more streamlined and more getting to the goal faster. And one quick thing I could say that would be, you know, worth some advocacy, and maybe it's just from, you know, people who are in the profession around town, but some sort of a person on the inside of the city that can get to the heart of the matter. What does the city really want for this property, and how can we get there? And then to not have it be like having to go talk to this person and that person and that person, because what happens is you end up having to make a complete set of plans that may or may not be what ends up being able to be built, but you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on it. And it's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years. So if we could get to those answers faster and we could get to them with a lot less money spent, I think you would find that developers would give a lot and try to move much, much closer to what the city's actual goals are. So I don't know how to do that. I don't work in a municipal setting, and I know that there's an awful lot of levers there that you got to pull. But I think it's worth a discussion, and it's worth our citizens being you know, involved in those discussions.
Doug, can you tell us a little bit more about the landscape? How do you plan to design it to be regenerative? I think living building has a requirement of food gardens. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So we have to produce food on the property, and it has to be proven to be actually, used by people and things like that. We also have to make biomass essentially. So we want plants that are going to have pollinators there. This area is actually a kind of a right off a pretty major flyway for migrating birds. So we want to make habitat for birds on the property, and we also want to make it possible for the people who live there to have, put their hands in the dirt and grow some food. And, I also, a lot of these are going to be things that we have to go vertical with because there's just not a lot of space on the lot. I mean, it's 12 square feet more than I need to do the project essentially. So, but there is a huge component of not only edible plants, but also, thinking about pollinators, thinking about birds, thinking about things that how we can sort of make this go from being a net negative on that property, which it is, pretty much most homes are kind of. So how do we transform that into a biological preserve in some senses, and not only for animals but also for people?
So thanks to one of our Vice President, Dave Dye, joining us here. He has a very technical question, just kind of getting into rigid insulation in the walls. What needs to be the R value for rigid insulation on the outside of a 2x6 wall? If the insulation in the cavity is R19, does the rigid insulation on the outside of the wall need to be an R10 to avoid any problems of condensation?
Well, let me see here. So if you have a true R19 on your wall, so I would say you need an R value on the outside of about R6 of rigid insulation. If I can mention, one of the reasons I said don't use that pink foam and blue foam, the rigid foam, is blown with hydrofluorocarbons. That is, all those little air bubbles in the foam are made of hydrofluorocarbons, which have 1,500 times the potency of carbon dioxide, each and every molecule of it. So when you use those foams, you're actually building in about 50 years of greenhouse gas potential into that structure. Now, those foams are amazing from a structural capacity. There's a lot to really like about them, but until they figure out how to not blow them with HFCs, I really strongly encourage builders not to use those foams. And EPS foam, so those are called XPS foams, by the way. EPS foam they're both polystyrenes, but EPS is expanded stylet polystyrene rather than the XPS, which is extruded stylet polystyrene. The expanded polystyrene is one of the more green products out there. If you're talking about a petroleum-based product, it takes about 7 months to recover the greenhouse gas potential of manufacture of an EPS foam, and that's that white coffee cup foam that we're so used to seeing. You can get that in really dense now, and it's waterproof, and it does almost the same things that XPS foam does without nearly the amount of carbon footprint. I shouldn't say carbon footprint, I should say greenhouse gas potential, because it's not carbon.
Right. Thank you. So how is the structure designed to invite biking or other low emission mobility?
Right, that's a really big thing that we have to do. So now, as far as mobility, there is a bus stop right across the street from this house. So that helps us because we really have to encourage carpooling and mass transit. There's all kinds of mass transit right in this area, actually. So it's good from that perspective, but I am planning on having a hanging bike rack that's underneath an overhang on the home for all 24 people that would eventually live there. So everybody can hang their bike up on the wall, and it's protected from the elements, and they can lock it.
Another question here, are there any plans to include electric car charging for covered parking? Because they said renters are often limited in the ability to charge electric vehicles.
Yes, I need 2 of them. So 2 out of the 6 parking spots would have electric chargers.
Great. So the other question here is, you spoke a little bit about payback costs for landlords, but as a longtime renter in Ann Arbor, I'm wondering how you see the cost of renting these units compared to other units in the area. I worry about how these much needed environmental improvements will impact the already awful housing affordability in the city.
It's a problem. I have not much to say about that other than, you know, we are looking at the possibility of doing an affordable unit in here. And I am hoping to do that because I'm hoping to actually get, you know, HUD or Fannie Mae to help finance this project. The banks are a little skittish right now about what they're going to be able to do. So I'm worried about that. And I would like this to be an affordable, I would like to include affordable housing in this, but I also need to be able to pay the monthly mortgage. And with some of those programs, if I can extend the length of the amortization, it makes it a lot more possible to include affordable housing. And I think that really, that's where the federal government has a role to play that can't be played by a local government or even a state government, because they can run these programs through the Housing and Urban Development or through Fannie Mae or through Freddie Mac, and they could make it available for these units to have more affordable housing. It would be in my economic interest to do that if I could get a longer term and a longer amortization, and if a condition of getting that was to make affordable housing. And I would be all in favor of that, but that's really comes down to a policy question, because it's so difficult to afford building and making that monthly payment in Ann Arbor as well. So I recognize it's a problem on both sides, and I think that there's a strong role for the federal government to play here.
Any ideas on how we incentivize landlords to do retrofits to electrify? You kind of spoke to it a little bit over time with your building, but I guess any more details to add to that from how you approach a landlord to do that?
Gosh, you know, it comes down to that carrot and the stick thing. What incentives can you offer a landlord to do that? And then what policies can you make that say that they have to do that? And I think both of those can evolve. Like I said, carrots work better to me than sticks because it doesn't create this well of animosity behind it, and which can also, you know, result in people being, you know, coming out and, you know, being mad at the government and all that kind of stuff. So I like carrots better, but I also would say that, you know, at some level, you have to be concerned about affordability. Of, you know, you can't make people do things that are going to cause them to lose properties or those types of things. And many times, you know, these can be right on the edge. You know, your mortgage is barely covering the rent, and that the rent is barely covering the mortgage, in other words, or to say it more appropriately. So I think we just need to look at good policies that help people get there. And, you know, some landlords will and some landlords won't, but that's where the stick comes in too.
So talking about bringing these buildings all electric, obviously that would either mean all electric stoves, or I would assume induction. So how do you get renters who, you know, want to rent here and be a part of this, but they love cooking and they love their gas stove? I mean, what are you going to do to help out with that?
Try out an induction range. They're great. I love to cook. I've been cooking from, you know, like trying to be, I've worked in restaurants for a lot of years at night, even as a side job, just because I loved the action and all that was happening. And I love to cook, and I don't feel like I'm missing a thing with my induction range. So, you know, you have to have specific pans, but to be honest, the pans that I had to buy for my induction range were actually better than what I was cooking with before. So, you know, I enjoy using the pans. I enjoy the fact that they heat evenly, and I enjoy the fact that that I can really control the temperature. So I just don't really see it. I don't see a big reduction in lifestyle there at all. I see none, actually. Now, I do know some chefs who would refuse to work with an induction range, and I kind of get that. But you know, if you're renting, I just say just give it a try. They're really good.
So use maybe the renter who keeps their lowest energy the lowest, you'll give them cooking instructions. That'll be what they win for the year or something.
Yeah, make us food. We'll all be happy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of
for a meal a month if you make it for everybody.
Right.
You know, and also, you know, I can't, you know, to meet these programs, I can't have natural gas in the home. Just no way, no how. So that is what it is.
Well, and so also on that note of like, you know, occupancy, there are some requirements to my knowledge, you know, well, of actually reporting real utility usage, you know, 9 months or a year later and hitting real results that rely on the occupants. And my understanding is indoor air quality metrics too. Can you speak a little bit how you might plan to engage with occupants? And I know you're still just trying to focus on building the building, but just thinking ahead, have you thought any of that out?
Yeah, I have, because first of all, it is a requirement, but secondly, this is a fundamentally different type of house, and you need to have kind of an instruction book for how do people use it. But the air quality in this house would be stellar, and so is the comfort, and so every bedroom will have its own ability to control the temperature, humidity, and also really honestly even how much airflow is coming into the room. And then of course there's the ones that are in the common areas as well. I kind of want to live in this house, man. It's better than what I live in, you know. And but part of that is just kind of doing the right thing with making sure that the home has excellent air quality and that we're getting lots of good ventilation without paying that energy penalty. And you know, one of the interesting things is when you build a passive house or something to that level, you know, you need to think about how you're going to dehumidify that house in the summer, because the air conditioning will kick on and they're so efficient that 10 minutes later the air conditioning is kicked off and it hasn't removed the moisture from the air. And then like that, the moisture is what feels cold or, you know, kind of clammy in the summertime. So we actually need to make different systems, because in the summertime, you need to remove the moisture more than anything else. That's how you make these buildings comfortable.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned removing of moisture. Do you have a specific idea on what way you're going to be doing that?
Yeah, right now we're planning for a Chiltrix system, so that has an individual ceiling cassette in each and every room, and that will control heat, cooling, and moisture. They're very quiet. They're nondescript. They don't show up much, so you wouldn't really notice them. Right. But it's not ducted, so it's an individual line that comes to each of those, and then it removes the moisture in the summertime, and it cools in the summertime as well, and then it also heats in the winter. They're pretty awesome. They're super efficient, amazingly efficient.
Yeah. So I know a lot of passive houses, and I forget if you mentioned this, so sorry, but they typically will just use the ERV, whatever HRV, to also ventilate the bathrooms to reduce, you know, more holes, more equipment, and sometimes even the kitchen. So can you just talk about, you know, the benefits of doing that versus using a bath fan?
Yeah, I mean, there's no comparison really. Yeah, so by having a ERV port in every bathroom, we're pulling air out of that bathroom, and the fresh air is coming into the bedroom. So there's this constant cycling of air in the house. And so when you're sleeping, you're going to be having that fresh air come into your sleeping quarters, and it's being pulled out of the bathroom, so that any sort of, you know, excess moisture and things like that are always being pulled out of the bathroom. You'll be able to boost each of these. So if you're taking a shower, for instance, and you want to remove the moisture more quickly, you can boost it up to full power by pushing a button. Just like you would with a bath fan. It's just a button, not a switch. Also, the kitchens are required to have a fair amount of ability to remove air from the kitchen, and also a boost switch there in case you're cooking and things like that. And also the utility area where you do your laundry is also required to have a port that takes stale air out of there, because that's where people put laundry soaps and other chemicals.
Charlie, why don't I try to unmute you if you want to speak? Are you there?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, so I'm curious about Doug's thoughts on tiny homes, because I'm here as a member of a totally different industry. I'm just interested in efficient homes. And as you pointed out, one of the biggest increases in our energy usage came from the fact that our houses just got a lot bigger. So what are your opinions on that kind of movement that's so popular right now?
I love it. I mean, I wish, we've had a couple people that we've talked to over the years that, started out wanting a tiny home, and before you knew it, it kind of got to be 1,200-1,500 square feet. So starts getting out of that territory. The thing that I think would really work well for tiny homes is they would be really well suited to that modular based construction. And I don't really know how to promote them, their use very well, because generally speaking, when I've talked to people who want a tiny home and their budget is kind of maybe in the $30,000-$40,000 range, well, it's really hard to get an excavator out and do all your sort of your mechanicals and the utilities you're going to need on site and things like that, and be able to make them work. But if you can, it's a great way to make an affordable house. And I think that one of my things that I live in a 1,500 square foot house, 1,550 actually, which is small by modern standards. There's 4 of us and a dog, but I feel like we've been able to maximize that space pretty well. And so a tiny home might not work for a family, but I could completely see living in one that was 600 or 800 square feet and being perfectly comfortable. So I don't know what to say other than I love tiny homes and I'd love to build more of them. It's just it's a supply and demand issue in some ways. The smaller a home gets, the more expensive it is by the square foot. So tiny homes are very expensive by the square foot because they're a tiny amount of square feet. And that's an issue that is hard to get over. But I think that sort of that modular building and something where it's made in a factory and shipped to that site could be a possible solution for that.
Is there a list of time spans for return on investment for any modifications item by item? You share any of that?
I don't have the math on that yet. I actually am just in the process of trying to figure out sort of a general framework for what this is going to cost in the first place, because we don't have everything specified out yet. But I certainly plan on sharing all that data, and I really want to, because again, part of this whole reason for this project is to share what is possible. And I'm motivated to make this work in a way that is the most affordable possible, because I want to inspire other people to do it too.
Mm. Here's another question. Oh, thank you. Okay, yep. Are there any last questions before we wrap up? I guess one of them I kind of wondered about briefly was the net positive aspect. If I understand living building, you're actually trying to produce more energy than you consume and keep the building resilient during inevitable grid outages. So can you talk a little bit about that, and do carbon offsets play into that at all, or what are you going to plan on doing?
Has to be net positive on the site, and you have to have batteries enough to store 1 week of power outage. So that's it. And boy, I mean, that's tough. That's really tough to get there. I mean, I thought this building was going to be maybe in the 20 to 25K range, because it's so efficient, and every little piece and part of it that I've been maximizing, I'm probably up to 40, 45K on this kilowatts to make this go net zero. And then I got to go that extra to make it net positive. So where I thought I was going to be able to do the carport and call it a day, it's not going to work. And ironically, one of the biggest users in this case is the hot water. So I'm looking at ways that I can really substantially reduce the hot water energy consumption. It's a strange calculation though, because I could do it with solar thermal, and I could have that be carbon, energy from the sun essentially. But the amount that I'd have to do that in the winter time is like 3-4 times as much as what I need in the summer. So it's more cost effective to put a heat pump hot water heater in and solar panels and go net zero that way on it than it is to put in solar thermal, unless you can store that solar thermal excess that you have in the summer somewhere and reuse it. And that's something I've been doing on a couple projects, is making what I call a solar thermal battery. So we put energy under the ground and try to really make it a lot more hot in the summer. It's a contained insulated vessel, and then withdraw that in the winter. But this project is not responding real well to that because of a variety of reasons. But so I've been unable to kind of crack that code, but I am working on it because the hot water consumption may be up to 50% of the total load on this building, which is incredible.
And what was the water heater you're using again? What kind is it? Type?
So right now I'm looking at the Sandon hot water heaters, and I just love those. I've never installed one. I'm hoping to do it very soon. But they're, the refrigerant is a CO2 refrigerant, so carbon dioxide is the refrigerant rather than the R410A or one of these hydrofluorocarbon refrigerant gases, which again have this enormous greenhouse gas potential, and they will eventually leak. So, also the CO2 refrigerant gases that makes this hot water unit just incredibly efficient. So between that, I'm just trying to figure out if I can preload that water somehow. I'm definitely doing drain heat recovery. So I've done those systems before. They're relatively inexpensive and they're very effective. I've been able to raise incoming temperatures by up to 30 degrees from what's coming in from the street using that method. And then, so that'll recover some of the waste heat that's just going down the drain otherwise. And, I'm trying to see if there's some way I can get this system to take a loop underground. And then if I can get it to do that, it might make sense to start looking into solar thermal and seeing if I can make that fly. The other part of solar thermal, though, is a lot of it is the mechanics behind it, the electronics that you need, and the ability to track it it's pretty difficult. In Germany, they are using this more and more, and they literally have a cube, and you just plug it in, and you can use it in this method, and it's just, man, they really got it together over there.
Interesting. One pretty in-depth question here on the battery. Will the battery storage be an exterior bank or interior? And does the battery storage area require any fire suppression? And also, what is the life expectancy of a battery that you might use?
Interior or exterior, I don't know, but I'm thinking interior. I think I have a space in mind for them. Fire suppression, yes, I need it anyway. Life expectancy, I have no idea. I've never done it before. I am interested in becoming a dealer of Tesla batteries, which apparently are the person I've been talking to about that has said, they're really, really well made in terms of their energy density and also just really plug and play. Like the whole course for how to install them is 4 hours. So kind of, not that I'm surprised, but it turns out to be a really excellent technology out there in the market. Also, you can do, with batteries, you can do, what do they call it? Load shedding, is that it?
Yeah.
Anyway, where you have a time of day meter, and so if the sun didn't fill the batteries up, you fill them up at night, and then that's the first thing you use the next morning, during the day when the rates are higher, which makes sense. It's good for the utility, and it's good for the price that you pay for the electricity, and makes a lot of sense.
Well, Doug, I do not see any more questions here right now. But before we wrap up, where can people contact you, either if they have more concerns or questions about the specific project, or just want to learn more about it, or reach out to you and learn more about what you do?
Well, I can see why you mentioned maybe putting contact information on that last page, Brett. I didn't, but anyway, my email address is doug@homewithmeadowlark.com. So that's HOMEWITH, meadowlark.com. And it's just my first name. Kirk and I were the first two people in the company, so we have the pleasure of having just our first names. Other than that, you can go visit our website anytime, and certainly you can reach us there too.
Doug, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Public service announcement, please, if you don't have to go out, stay indoors, stay down. And I think if we can do this, we can beat this thing. We can get back to work quicker. For those of you in Michigan, Whitmer just literally announced stay-at-home orders until the 28th. So please, if you're not helping a loved one, not doing essential work, stay in. We'll beat this thing together. We'll move forward. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you, Brett.